Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hare Krishna, Hare Bol. Namaste friends. We've been seeing the pastimes of Krishna. The previous episode we saw Brahmana's wives part 1, that is delivering the wives of the Brahmanas. So now let's continue with the part 2. Carrying out Krishna's order, the boys immediately went to the wives of the Brahmanas. They found the wives sitting inside the Brahmana's house. They were very beautifully decorated with ornaments. After offering them all respectful obeisance, the boys said, "Dear mothers, please accept our humble obeisance and hear our statement. May we inform you that Lord Krishna and Balarama are nearby. They have come here with the cows, and you may know also that we have come here under their instructions. All of us are very hungry, therefore we have come to you for some food. Please give us something to eat for Krishna, Balarama and ourselves." Immediately upon hearing this, the wives of the Brahmanas became anxious for Krishna and Balarama. These reactions were spontaneous. They did not have to be convinced of the importance of Krishna and Balarama. Immediately upon hearing their names, they became very eager to see them. Being advanced by thinking of Krishna constantly, they were performing the greatest form of mystic meditation. All the wives then became very busily engaged in filling up different pots with nice food. Due to the performance of the sacrifice, the various foods were all very palatable. After collecting of feast, they prepared to go to Krishna, their most beloved object, exactly in the way rivers flow to the sea. For a long time, the wives had been eager to see Krishna. However, when they were preparing to leave home to go and see him, their husbands, fathers, sons and relatives asked them not to go. But the wives did not comply. When a devotee is called by the attraction of Krishna, he does not care for his bodily ties. The women entered the forest of Vrindavana on the bank of the Yamuna, which was verdant with vegetation and newly grown vines and flowers. Within that forest, they saw Krishna and Balarama engaged in tending the cows along with their very affectionate boyfriends. The Brahmanas' wives saw Krishna with a blackish complexion wearing a garment that glittered like gold. He wore a nice garland of forest flowers and a peacock feather on his head. He was also painted with the minerals found in Vrindavana, and he looked exactly like a dancing actor on a theatrical stage. They saw him resting one hand on the shoulder of his friend, and in his other hand he was holding a lotus flower. His ears were decorated with the lilies. He wore marks of tilaka, and he was smiling charmingly. With their very eyes, the wives of the Brahmanas saw the Supreme Personality of Godhead, of whom they had heard so much, who was so dear to them, and in whom their minds were always absorbed. Now they saw him eye to eye and face to face, and Krishna entered within their hearts through their eyes. Within themselves, they began to embrace Krishna to their heart's content, and the distress of separation was mitigated immediately. They were just like great sages who, by their advancement of knowledge, merge into the existence of the Supreme. As the super soul living in everyone's heart, Lord Krishna could understand their minds. They had come to him despite all the protest of their relatives, fathers, husbands and brothers and sons, and despite all the duties of household affairs. They came just to see him, who was their life and soul. They were exactly following Krishna's instruction in the Bhagavad Gita. One should surrender to him, giving up all varieties of occupational and religious duties. He therefore began to speak to them, smiling very magnificently. It should be noted in this connection that when Krishna entered into the wives' hearts, and when they embraced him and felt the transcendental bliss of being merged with him, the Supreme Lord Krishna did not lose his identity, nor did the individual wives lose theirs. The individuality of both the Lord and the wives remained, yet they felt oneness in existence. When a lover submits to his lover without any pinch of personal consideration, that is called oneness. Lord Chaitanya has taught us this feeling of oneness in his Sikshashtaka. Krishna may act freely, doing whatever he likes, but the devotee should always be in oneness or an agreement with his desires. The oneness was exhibited by the wives of the Brahmanas in their love for Krishna. Krishna welcomed them with the following words: "My dear wives of the Brahmanas, you are all very fortunate and are welcome here. Please let me know what I can do for you. You are coming here to see me neglecting all the restrictions and hindrances of relatives, fathers, brothers, and sons and husbands is completely befitting. One who does this actually knows his self-interest, because rendering transcendental loving service unto me without motive or restriction is actually auspicious for the living entities." Lord Krishna here confirms that the conditioned soul can reach the highest perfectional stage by surrendering to him. One must give up all other responsibilities. This complete surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the most auspicious path for the conditioned soul, because the Supreme Lord is the supreme objective of love. Everyone is loving his self according to the advancement of his knowledge. Ultimately, when a person comes to understand that his self is a spirit soul, and that the spirit soul is nothing but part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, he recognizes the Supreme Lord as the ultimate goal of love and then surrenders unto him. This surrender is considered auspicious for the conditioned soul. Our life, property, home, wife, children, house, country, society, and all paraphernalia which are very dear to us are expansions of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is the central object of love, because he gives us all bliss, expanding himself in so many ways according to our different situations, namely bodily, mentally, and spiritual. "My dear wives of the Brahmanas," Krishna said, "you can now return to your homes, engage yourself in sacrificial activities and in the service of your husbands and household affairs, so that your husbands will be pleased with you and the sacrifice which they have begun will be properly executed. After all, your husbands are householders, and without your help, how can they execute their prescribed duties?" The wives of the Brahmanas replied, "Dear Lord, this sort of instruction does not befit you. Your eternal promise is that you will always protect your devotees, and now you must fulfill this promise. Anyone who comes and surrenders unto you never goes back to the conditioned life of material existence. We expect that you will now fulfill your promise. We have surrendered onto your lotus feet, which are covered by tulsi leaves, so we have no desires to give up the shelter of your lotus feet and return to the company of our so-called relatives, friends, and society. And what shall we do if we return home? Our husbands, brothers, fathers, sons, mothers, and friends will no longer accept us at home, because we have already left them all. Therefore, we have no shelter to return to. Please, therefore, do not ask us to return home, but arrange for our stay under your lotus feet, so that we can eternally live under your protection." The Supreme Personality of Godhead replied, "My dear wives of the Brahmanas, rest assured that your husbands will not neglect you on your return, nor will your brothers, sons, or fathers refuse to accept you, because you are my pure devotees. Not only your relatives, but also people in general, as well as the demigods, will be satisfied with you. Krishna is situated as the super soul in everyone's heart. So someone who becomes a pure devotee of Lord Krishna immediately becomes pleasing to everyone. The pure devotee of Lord Krishna is never inimical to anyone, nor can any sane person be an enemy of a pure devotee. Transcendental love for me does not depend upon bodily condition, Krishna said further, "But anyone whose mind is always absorbed in me will surely very soon come to me for my eternal association." After being instructed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, all the wives returned home to their respective husbands. Pleased to see their wives back home, the Brahmanas sat together with them and executed the performances of sacrifices as enjoined in the Shastras. According to the Vedic principle, religious rituals must be executed by the husband and wife together. When the Brahmanas' wives returned, the sacrifice was duly and nicely executed. One of the Brahmanas' wives, however, who had been forcibly checked from going to see Krishna, began to remember him as she heard of his bodily features. Being completely absorbed in his thoughts, she gave up her material body conditioned by the laws of nature. After the departure of the Brahmanas' wives, Sri Govinda and his cowherd boyfriends enjoyed the food they had offered. In this way, the ever-joyful personality of Godhead exhibited his transcendental pastimes in the guise of an ordinary human being in order to attract the common people to Krishna consciousness. With his words and beauty, he attracted all the cows, cowherd boys and damsels in Vrindavana. All of them together enjoyed the pastimes of the Lord. After the return of their wives from Krishna, the Brahmanas engaged in the performance of sacrifice began to regret their sinful activities in refusing food to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. They could finally understand their mistake. Engaged in the performance of Vedic rituals, they had neglected the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who had appeared just like an ordinary human being and asked for some food. They began to condemn themselves after seeing the faith and devotion of their wives. They regretted very much that although their wives were elevated to the platform of pure devotional service, they themselves could not understand even a little bit of how to love and offer transcendental loving service to the Supreme Soul. They began to talk among themselves. To hell with our being born Brahmanas, to hell with our learning all the Vedic literatures, to hell with our performing great sacrifices and observing all the rules and regulations, to hell with our family, to hell with our expert service in performing the rituals exactly according to the description of the scriptures. To hell with it all, for we have not developed transcendental loving service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is beyond the speculation of the mind, body and senses. The learned Brahmanas, expert in Vedic ritualistic performances, were properly regretful, because if one does not develop Krishna consciousness, all discharge of religious duty is simply a waste of time and energy. They continued to talk among themselves. The external energy of Krishna is so strong that it can create illusion to overcome even the greatest mystic yogi. Although we expert Brahmanas are considered to be the teachers of all the sections of human society, we also have been illusioned by the external energy. Just see how fortunate these women are. They have so devotedly dedicated their lives to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, that they could easily do what is ordinarily so difficult. They gave up their family connections, which are just like a dark well, for the continuation of material miseries. Women in general, being very simple at heart, can very easily take to Krishna consciousness. And when they develop love for Krishna, they can easily get liberation from the clutches of Maya, which are very difficult for even the so-called intelligent and learned men to surpass. The Brahmanas continued, according to Vedic injunction, women are not allowed to undergo the purificatory process of the initiation by the sacred thread, nor are they allowed to live as brahmacharinis in the ashrama of the spiritual master, nor are they advised to undergo the strict disciplinary procedures nor are they very expert in discussing the philosophy of self-realization. And by nature they are not very pure, nor are they very much attached to auspicious activities. Therefore, how wonderful it is that these women have developed transcendental love for Krishna, the Lord of all mystic yogis. They have surpassed all of us in firm faith and in devotion unto Krishna. Although we are considered to be masters in all purificatory process, we did not actually know what their goal is because we are too much attached to the materialistic way of life. Even though we were reminded of Krishna and Balarama by the cowherd boys, we disregarded them. We now think that the Supreme Personality of Godhead simply played a trick of mercy on us by sending his friends to beg food from us. Otherwise, he had no need to send them. He could have satisfied their hunger then and there just by willing to do so. If someone denies Krishna's self-sufficiency on hearing that he was tending the cows for his livelihood, or if someone doubts his not being in need of the food, thinking that he was actually hungry, then such a person should understand that the goddess of fortune is always engaged in his service. In this way, the goddess can break her faulty habit of restlessness. In Vedic literatures like Brahma Samhita, it is stated that Krishna is served in his abode with great respect by not only by goddess of fortune but many thousands. Therefore, it is simply illusion for one to think that Krishna begged food from the Brahmanas. It was actually a trick to show them mercy by teaching them that they should accept him in pure devotional service instead of engaging in ritualistic ceremonies. The Vedic ceremonial paraphernalia, the suitable place, the suitable time, the different grades of articles for performing the ritualistic ceremonies, the Vedic hymns, the process of sacrifice, the priest who is able to perform the sacrifice, the fire, the demigods, the performer of the sacrifice, and the religious principles are meant for understanding Krishna. For Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is the Supreme Lord Vishnu and the Lord of all the mystic yogis. Because he has appeared as a child in the dynasty of Yadus, we were so foolish that we could not understand that he is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Brahmanas said, but on the other hand, we are very proud because we have such exalted wives who have developed pure transcendental service of the Lord without being shackled by our rigid position. Let us therefore offer our respectful obeisances unto the lotus feet of Lord Krishna, under whose illusory energy called Maya we are absorbed in fruitive activities. We therefore pray to Lord to be kind enough to excuse us because we are simply captivated by his external energy. We transgressed his order without knowing his transcendental glories. The Brahmanas repented their sinful activities. They wanted to go personally to offer their obeisance unto him. But being afraid of Kamsa, they could not go to Krishna and surrender unto him. In other words, it's very difficult for one to surrender fully unto the personality of Godhead without being purified by devotional service. The example of the learned Brahmanas and their wives is vivid. The wives of the Brahmanas, because they were inspired by the pure devotional service, did not care for any kind of opposition. They immediately went to Krishna, but the Brahmanas, although they had come to know the supremacy of the Lord and were repenting, were still afraid of King Kamsa because they were too much addicted to fruitive activities. With that, we end this beautiful chapter. It is so wonderful to keep listening again and again the glories of Krishna. In divine service, this is Lakshmi Srinivasan. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Bow to the Supreme, peace be with all. Thank you. Hare Krishna, Hari Bol.